Hello. Hi, welcome. I'm happy to see everyone here. And we are happy here to be also guests in Ganawage, the place name for the city of Montreal, which translates to where many nations gather. We also just wanted to take a quick moment to acknowledge that we are here gathered on unceded Indigenous lands. And we recognize the one moment. Oh no, it's happening already. Ganin Giha Nation, who are the ancestral custodians of this land. And just as a quick note, wanted to let you know that feel free to, we're gonna have a bit of more of a conversational panel today. And so if anyone has any questions throughout, just feel free to put your hand up and we're more than happy to connect with you right away. So I will just start off by introducing my gal pal here to the right of me, Becca Taylor. So Becca Taylor is a multidisciplinary artist, curator, with a Cree, Scottish, and Irish background. Her practices involve investigations of Indigenous community building and Indigenous feminisms through various mediums, including video, text, and installation. She was awarded the Aboriginal Curator in Residence from the Canada Council, and that was at the Urban Shaman in 2016. And then in 2016-2017, she was the Indigenous Curatorial Research Practicum at the BAM Center, where she curated a show, A Light Left On. So currently, Becca is co-curating with me the 4th iteration of the BACA, the Native Art Contemporary Biennial, and is based out of Edmonton, Alberta, and a core member of Otsutsiwan Contemporary Art Collective. Now, Becca.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming today. And now I have the chance to introduce Niki. This is rare. We always kind of introduce ourselves. We thought we'd switch it up a bit today and introduce each other. So Niki Little, Wabiska
Wabshki Mayangan.
Thank you. Is a mother, artist, observer, arts administrator, and a founding member of the Ephemerals. She is of OG Cree English descent from Garden Hill First Nation, and she's based in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Her interests lay in artistic and curatorial strategies that investigate cultural consumerism and Indigenous economies and Indigenous women and feminism. Niki is the director of the National Indigenous Media Arts Coalition and is planning a National Indigenous Media Arts Conference in Saskatoon from June 12th to 15th. Tickets are now on sale. Listen, witness, transmit, if you guys want to go. And she, like she mentioned, we're co-curating the BACA together, and we've been here since January. And the exhibition opens up on May 3rd at La Guilde, and then May 4th at Art Mirror, May 5th at Sherbrooke, and then May 6th at Stewart Hall. Great, and our good friend and here, Camille, is a art community organizer who developed a bachelor in art history and a certificate in gender studies at the University de Quebec et Montreal, pardon for my French, in 2016. Camille has a vested interest in experience in Indigenous art organization, practices, and politics in Jojage. She collaborated with the Montreal Urban Aboriginal Community Strategy Network and the Cabot Square Project, and she was previously worked as the Media Arts Project Coordinator at the Independent Media Arts Alliance and with the National Indigenous Media Arts Coalition. Based on her own identity, Camille is interested in the duality between the presence and the invisible of mixed Indigenous and queer artists in the urban space. Her specific experience led to her to found Unceded Voices, Street Arts Convergence in 2014, a biennial convergence of primarily Indigenous identified women, two-spirited queer, and women of color street artists and muralists from all over Turtle Island. Currently, Camille is the project coordinator of the Jojage project.
And then finally, after this formal introduction here, we have Carolyn Monet. And Carolyn is a multidisciplinary artist from Outaouais, Quebec. She studied both sociology and communication at the University of Ottawa and the University of Granada before pursuing a career in visual arts and film. She's based in Montreal, and her work has been programmed in exhibitions and festivals internationally, including the Palais de Tokyo in Paris, the Haus der Kultur der Wet Berlin, TIFF Sundance, Aesthetica in the UK, Cannes, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Montreal. Arsenal, Axno, and the National Gallery of Ottawa. In 2016, she was selected for the Sin Foundation residency in Paris, and her most recent exhibition, Like Ships in the Night, is currently presented at the Walter Phillips Gallery in Banff, Alberta. So that's the formality underway. We can get into the conversation now. Becca, I'll let you go.
Yeah, so we're just going to begin, Niki and I are just going to begin by talking a bit about the exhibition entitled níchiwamiskwém, nimidet, My Sister, My Soeur, which, like I said, is going to be opening up in like a week and a half. We're getting ready to install it right now. So Niki and I applied for the project through the Aboriginal Curatorial Collective and Becca, and were selected. So we came here in January to start engaging with the community here and building up the exhibition. The exhibition will feature 40 Indigenous women artists, and it's all, feminine, trans, and two-spirited artists, and some non-binary artists. And the exhibition is focused around the relationships we share with one another as Indigenous women, this idea of sisterhood. And we really wanted to explore this idea of what it means for women and our relationships to one another throughout this exhibition. So we invited a lot of works that were very collaborative based, where people were creating works together. And the further we got along in the exhibition, we realized how much uncredited collaboration is amongst us naturally, you know, whether we're relying on these women to help us with photography, like doing the photograph for our work, or to be present within the artwork with us or for us. In these conversations, there was moments where other Indigenous women artists became the audio sound composers for films to support each other in these works. So Niki and I really started discussing this idea when we were sitting around one day having dinner together, as we do many of nights. We had developed our relationship a number of years ago, and we're consistently in conversation and about the women that we were surrounded by, and the incredible matrilineal mentorship that we had received over the years. And then we just really started talking about as well the trauma Indigenous women face, and how we're so much more than that, and we were feeling like we were just being perceived as a victim or in very traumatic situations. So we really wanted to kind of explore that, and really within this exhibition show that we're here, we're living, these are our relationships and the diverse complexity within our relationships and where they exist, and kind of like allowing the artists to kind of like join in these conversations with us. And throughout it, we just kind of really started experiencing there's so many more relationships that we just personally don't have experience with that were coming into conversation, which was really exciting for us, because it was an opportunity for us to learn all these other relationships that had been formed based on your region, your territory, your identity, and who you're working with, which was really excited to be able to engage in conversation with them and learn as much as we could from them throughout this exhibition.
And so just going off of that, it was really interesting to be able to claim space and to think about all of these, our relationship and how it's impacted us, but then other relationships that perhaps we don't have lived experience with, but allowing them to speak, and for us to just actively listen, and then also actively give space to those narratives that need to be discussed. And so today, this panel is discussing Indigenous women in contemporary art. And so we kind of came up with this idea to think about sort of the matriarch, or the Indigenous matriarch within contemporary art within this nation-state of Canada. And so I kind of want to just ask a little bit, maybe to the collective here, who do you see as maybe someone that you've looked up to, or perhaps artists that you have seen throughout your development that has inspired you, or has paved the way for your practice?
I think when we speak about Montreal or Quebec, Francophone scene, of course, Nadimir is one big entity here. There was almost non-existent Indigenous women in the landscape of Francophone or Quebecois artists. So I think she was kind of a pioneer in having a presence in museum and galleries, being recognized as a contemporary Indigenous artist. And I think these women, or also, for example, Rita Letendre or Daphne Ojic, I think these women are really important to acknowledge because they allow us to, they made a type of work for their time that allow us kind of a new generation to make a different type of work also.
Yeah, I agree with Carolyn. And I think also thinking about Rebecca Belmore, for example, that I think for like younger generation, she's a big inspiration. And women, I don't know, women around me all the time, I think. They're just really, they were always a big inspiration for me. And elders, and yeah.
Do you have one, Becca?
Oh, I have lots.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's really important to like recognize the women that have come before us and have become these natural mentors to us. You know, Kathy Mattis was one of mine, Casey Adams, also Dana Warren, Kathleen Ash Milby, like all these women who I've met and gave me the support that I really needed to kind of find my voice within the contemporary art world, you know, but at the same time also my grandmother and my mother, and were also really huge influences to the way I practice and the things I think about and the ideas I'm interested in exploring. What about yours?
Well, I think I'd just like reiterate Daphne Ojic, and especially like her presence within Winnipeg, and with the other group of seven or the native group of seven, and so providing a space. Essentially, it was so wonderful. It's so wonderful to know that she just provided a space for artists to drop in with with paint, with supplies, and then just to be able to have an active conversation. Because at that point, museums were not interested in the dialogue of contemporary voices, especially Indigenous voices. And so I think of her all the time, especially coming from Winnipeg, and knowing that is sort of a trace that's happened there, but not really memorialized or discussed in a way that should be celebrated more. So I really do think of her. And then I also think of, I got like Leanne Martin as a curator, and working, and the way that she has developed exhibitions and has fought for the rights for visual artists to be able to be accepted outside museum spaces, and then just that importance for us to be able to be here and to be able to speak in these ways. I think thinking about those arts administrators and curators too that have done that work. And then I guess like for me and Becca, we have an auntie who her name's Gloria Beckman, and she's kind of like just this wild lady who we go foraging with. She'll help us like flesh hide. She'll do all these like cultural practices with us, but she's just another level of just like pure spirit. And so I think for me, those are the types of women too that make these spaces accessible for us and to be able to do this work. And I think within that, it's kind of come a little bit through that mentorship has been a way, or not mentorship, but these connections and sort of that lineage of being able to connect with these women, whether it's over tea or however, and to be able to share those moments.
Yeah, well, gathering is a really important part of the way we communicate and we come together, you know, and a lot of elements throughout this exhibition has gathering. Carolyn is one of our artists in there, and there's one of the works Niki and I have been thinking a lot about that you titled Renaissance, and this portrait of these 6 Indigenous women from different generations. Can you talk to us about that work and the importance and impact of bringing women together in the relationship to the title?
Yes. I guess the genesis of that work started with a film I made in 2016 called Creatura Dada, and it was in response to how Indigenous women were portrayed in the media, often as victims of poverty, abuse, violence. So I really wanted to show them in the most exuberant, eccentric, beautiful way as possible. So I decided to make a feast, a kind of a Dadaesque feast where we would be totally exuberant and we would surround ourselves around the table with champagne, eating oysters and lobster, and just be as, be as happy as we could be, and be very vibrant and colorful. I think that was quite powerful because I had the chance to have Alanis Obomsawin on my table. Nadia Mir was also present, and we were different generations, just 6 women getting together. And we don't necessarily have the opportunity to, we all live in Montreal, but we don't necessarily get together and sit and have that time to actually share for an entire day. So I made the film in the spirit of wanting to spend more time with these women. And the idea just kind of started emerging that I wanted to do more of these. So with the first one, I explored the Dada movement, and then the second one wanted to explore more of the Renaissance movement. What would it look like if, as Indigenous people, we were allowed to explore those movements as well over the years, and if we could appropriate some cultural elements from Europe and how it would it look like from our perspective. Again, I invited 6 women from different generations. This time it was specifically Francophone living in Montreal. So there were, for example, Catherine Boivin, who's still studying at the University l'UQAM, just early 20s, and Alanis Obomsawin was still there, and we had just different generations getting together for an entire day and shooting a photograph, kind of a high fashion Renaissance style, but an Indigenous Renaissance style. So picking some stuff from the Renaissance movements and creating costumes and getting our makeup done and just having plain fun. And I think that's there's some strength in that, showing women in the most beautiful way instead of maybe what you would expect on the government documents or stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a really striking photo, and I think for me what resonated the most was like the gaze and sort of, you'll see it when you come to the opening. So it's really wonderful. They're just, everyone is really engaged with the camera, and the gaze shifts, and I really appreciate the fact that it's no longer about the viewer viewing us, whereas they are more projecting outwards. And I think for me that's sort of like the power of a matriarchal collective, or within that presence, and sort of thinking about that narrative that you're talking about.
Yeah, also thinking that traditionally women were the highest, and culturally they were the highest in our societies, where today Indigenous women are still the most marginalized group of people in our societies. So how can we shift that and bring it back to first-class material in a way? I was really interested in royalty and showcasing Indigenous women at the highest of all, as royalty, as King Louis XVI,
Yeah. And I think about that sort of power and that stance and that sort of like that element of gathering, and it kind of brings me to you, Camille, and sort of similar idea or similar action of gathering and sort of this visual identity or visual representation. And hoping that you could talk a little bit about your project, Unseated Voices, and sort of how that came to be, and sort of what did that mean to visually impact Montreal in a very public way, and sort of how that, I guess, the genesis of that.
So first, thank you for the invitation today. It's lovely. It's lovely to be here in an art fair. It's really impressive. Okay, so Unseated Voices, it started back in 2013. I was studying in France, and I was doing some street art. And so I was a street artist. I'm still a street artist, but at that time I was really into it. And I was kind of alone sitting there, and I was like, so I put some stuff in the street, and everyone was like destroying my things, and it was a lot about like feminism and things like that. And I was like, why am like alone struggling with my art in the street? So I was like, when I want to come back to Montreal, I don't want to be alone anymore. So I was thinking a way to bring other women with me in the street. And this is how this idea of a gathering, of a convergence, of women from different backgrounds. So Indigenous women, women of color, Black women, also queer, non-binary people, all together, because Montreal art scene, as other art scene, street art scene, it's really bro culture. So it's like really white dude doing their like graffiti, street art. So there's no space for women in general. So I was like, well, I'm gonna invite some women that I respect, some of my friends, different people together, and we're gonna go just take the space. So there was this idea of like gathering together, but also rethinking the colonial space outside institution, the real street. What does it mean to be on this land? Montreal was an Indigenous unceded land, but a lot of people don't know that. What to do with that? How to rethinking what the walls have to say to us also. So all these artists together, they bring their own identity to the wall, but also their own stories, their struggle, their resilience. And it's all about supporting each other. So a lot of these artists, they never do like a big mural or big with paste, or so it can be really like stressful, and you're like, oh, what I'm gonna do? So everyone support each other, help each other, talk about art, because most of the time artists are alone in the studio doing their own work, but in this idea of like being together for 2 weeks or 9 days and support each other, and giving the opportunity to the public and for people in the street to see another stories. And there's no project like that in Montreal. Like street art is really something that people think it's cute little flowers on the wall, but it can be more than just an imagery. It can bring other stories. We did 3 editions of Untitled Voices, and now I'm thinking about. We went to the state a couple weeks ago to Arizona. We bring some artists with us, and we also talk with students there, because this idea of Untitled Voices is also talking with the public. So we're not working with the city, for example. We literally go through the people. We'll like knock at the door, and we're like, hey, this is the project. So we want to talk with the people who are living in a neighborhood, with the community. So this idea of community is really important. Like creating dialogue. And my dream is like bringing this project through Canada. So we'll see how we're gonna be, but going in a little bus and going around, yeah.
That'd be wonderful. It's just making me think about there's so many, like the importance of having like street art and especially for Indigenous women to be actively putting these wheat pasted posters and murals and their voice actively within the streets within it, and you can see it popping up like across the states and across Canada, and then it's just making me think through an extension like the female collective, right? Like there's so many different Indigenous women's collectives that are forming throughout Canada. We got like the Ephemerals, and then the Rematriate collective. I'm part of a collective called Tsitsiwan, and then I started thinking a lot about like Idle No More and how that was begun by women sitting around a kitchen table, and how these community gets to become actively involved within the collective based on the projects that they're bringing to the community.
There's also the billboard project that's all women occupying billboards across Canada. And I find it wonderful what you're talking about street art, because it's about occupying space and taking as much space as possible. So the billboards project makes me think of that, but also...
And it's also like not waiting until people's gonna come to see us and be like, oh, this is interesting, we can help you. It's just taking the space. And it's also a grassroots project. So for like the couple first years, we didn't have money to do the project. So it was all grassroots. It was people who's like from community who will help us, support us. And it's interesting to bring this idea of like, it's not because we don't have financial support that we can do any project. It's the power of the people, of the women together, that it bring this kind of project. But for sure, like money help. But you know, it's like it's also the idea of like, oh, we can create like a community together, without like white colonial space, you know.
Yeah, and I think we want more. I mean, I feel a responsibility to occupy as much space as possible, not only for myself, but for an entire community. So I think these projects are really speaking about being present and taking that space that we were taken away from for so many years.
It kind of makes me think of, this is a question, I'm not sure how to like pose it, but sort of, you kind of brought up elements of it, this idea of community, and I think like in thinking about Indigenous women in contemporary art or within the contemporary art scene, there is this sort of element or a trace that comes through of community and sort of, you know, as we introduce ourselves, like I'm níchiwamiskwém from Garden Hill based in Winnipeg, I locate myself through my family and sort of that is the context that I present myself. And I often think about that idea about community within specifically to Indigenous art. And I wonder to you, sort of what role do you think community has? And do you think it's just specific, like it's, or do you think it's really unique to Indigenous art that community comes into play in such a unique way, like through grassroots movements or through maybe basically like just getting the shit done and just having to come collectively do that kind of labor? Do you think that, do you see that in other genres or milieus or?
Well, I'd say community is at the base, is very important for the Indigenous world. It feels like if we stand together, we will be able to create more opportunities and networking. So it feels definitely smaller and very meshed, that we need to keep that and make the mesh even stronger so nothing will go through, kind of. But of course, communities within the larger Indigenous community is also an interesting topic, because people need to understand there's all these differences within the larger community. Whether, I mean, I grew up in the suburbs of Ottawa almost. So that's also a difference from if you grew up in Winnipeg, and this is just to honor that also.
Yeah, and I think that like kind of, I guess like maybe I'm jumping ahead to other questions I had later on, but sort of this idea about having about community and being able to like localize these, whether they're protocols or structures, and making sure that, you know, you are able to create a sovereign space from a local community, and then being able to understand that like nationally or globally we have to look at this larger idea of community, and to be able to make sure that like broader structures or larger institutions and stuff are reflecting a localized moment, and understanding that it's a pendulum that shifts between these spaces. And so I like what you said.
Well, yeah, and then if we're thinking about, community, I think, and building up our community, Indigenous community, like extending outwards into like Western institutes, we have to talk about allyship too, right? Because we got all these incredible projects really, and space is starting to be made within them. I'm thinking like SBC, the Woodland School, Oboro on their year of Indigenous programming, Art Space, and their year of solo shows for Indigenous women, you know, and then once again the Billboard Project, right, which is run by Mawa, you know, like, I guess my question is about that, like how do we continue? How do we keep moving in that direction, right? Because Canada did have a big chunk of money through the Canada 150, right? And I'm kind of just curious to know how can we continue as that money starts disappearing a bit or lessening?
Well, so I'm the project coordinator for a project called Jojagi in Montreal. So it's run by the Aboriginal Curatorial Collective. This is exactly what we're working about. So it's about how to create, to continue of giving opportunity for Indigenous art project in Montreal, but also across Quebec. So we're doing a 2 years project. It's kind of a publicity here, but it's true. We're doing this 2 year project with exhibition, like Becca, for example, and we have a curatorial delegations coming through Quebec. We have other projects and events and stuff. So it's about networking with people and see opportunities to bring more Indigenous art project within the big Quebec art world and push it through. What we can do, how people are ready to also give more space for this kind of project, but how we can work together. So it's all about that, and I think we need more initiative like that it's not just like, oh, we're gonna have one exhibition here, one project there, or we're gonna celebrate the 375 anniversary of Montreal. Make no sense. So it's all about like how we can create a substantial relationship. And I think it's a big challenge. But there's some great project who's happening like that. So sometimes I have hope.
Yeah, I'm also hopeful that the 375 and 150 wasn't just a trend, and that we can move beyond that. I see multiple organizations that are realizing the role they can play towards reconciliation, and they're kind of ready to take actions. I think in the last years, the larger public has been exposed to Indigenous artists and to artworks that don't necessarily always are confined into the niches that people want to put us into very too often. So I think that's positive overall.
So then, when it comes to working within these spaces, though, how are we ensuring within these spaces that the Indigenous voice is being honored within that space and not being confined, because the Indigenous people have a certain methodology of working and the way we practice and everything. And, and I think there's been definitely lots of like waves of like women and men that have come before us that have like really broken ground. There's still a lot of being as a guest in these Western institutes, there's still some disrespect that's happening towards Indigenous people. And do you have any ideas how do we keep like that?
I think that for like big institutions or galleries, they need to change the way that they work, how their organization works. Like, for example, like hire more Indigenous people or like people of color too. And there's an institution, so it can also giving more space. It's starting by thinking how your institution run. So for me, it's starting there, because more often with the project that I'm working, for example, it's like you're coming to this place, but people don't know how to act. They don't know a lot, and so it's sometimes it can be hard to start a dialogue if there's no base of cultural knowledge and protocols and stuff. So understanding. I think this is a way to go, I will say.
Yeah, I'd say the Indigenous voice as a whole is kind of a phenomenon that is no longer possible to ignore in Canada. So it has and it will be present at every level. And again, I think there's some organizations that are really taking actions to making sure that this is done in the right way. I'm hopeful that this is the direction we're taking. But I think these conversations need to constantly continue to happen. And it's a bit unfortunate that we always have to find ourselves in the positions of educating and reminding people of how important this is. But this is the work that we're doing now, and to make sure that this is done properly for future generations.
It is a lot of labor. And I think that's like something maybe that is pretty unique to a lot of people standing up here, and then also even just within the arts, as well as sort of that labor of education, the emotional labor, advocacy labor, and all of those kinds of things that are always underlying, especially because reconciliation conversations are awkward. They're weird to start off. And a friend of mine who's a curator kind of just said it really great to me one day, because like about the idea about reconciliation and starting getting comfortable. And she's like, no, Indigenous curation is about disruption. You're supposed to disrupt because it's always been these Western structures for such a long time that this is what we need to do. And then it's interesting talking to people outside these conversations about disruption as a strategy, and sort of being like, why would you want to disrupt? And it's just like, well, we have to, like, we've always had to, we're continually having to. And I think it kind of makes me think about language a little bit. And I'm just wondering if, I am obviously basically only speak English. You've seen me struggle quite a bit today on other languages, but sort of thinking about language and thinking about where we are here, and thinking about sort of these indigenous epistemologies, methodologies, and cosmologies that are like starting to really filter into our practices and how we're discussing our work. And sort of how do you see language developing here, first off, I guess, around that, because I'm truly an outsider and I don't know this particular dialogue here around Indigenous art.
It's hard. I mean, my mom is from Kiriganzibi, Maniwaki, and she doesn't speak her language because my grandparents never taught her. So I don't speak the language, but I've been starting to take these Anishinaabemowin classes at the Native Montreal all winter, and so now I can speak probably like a 1 or 2 year old, which is great. It's better than a year ago, and I think these are initiatives that are extremely important because it's not because we don't. There's a concept about privilege, cultural privilege, let's say, where I would love to be able to speak my language, but I cannot because of the chaos of the past, for example. So it's kind of a responsibility to go back to it and relearn it. And I think because we have social media, or we have the internet, or we have more and more publications, or we have Indigenous people in positions that they can actually teach, they can actually be in universities, be in institutions, then we have more and more access to it. So I'm thinking this kind of wheel is turning, and that we're able to take back that power, and because with language also comes pride, and so if we can get that pride back, then we're going to kick ass.
Yeah, and also I think in Quebec there's this it's really particular for here, this French and English double colonization. I think for a lot of Indigenous people also it's hard to figure out how to navigate through this. So sometimes learning another language, it's like something else, and there's not a lot of resource for that, because there's this politics complex situation here that I'm sure you saw. But yeah, so the French and Quebec, French and English language, and all of this, I feel that it's complexify all the, situation.
And I guess and sort of further that, how are you finding, because I'm noticing sort of words like survivance or indigenize, even decolonize a while ago, and sort of these it's so passé. But sort of thinking about these words and how they're really becoming these spaces, especially for discussing Indigenous art, writing about Indigenous art, like how we are moving forward and how we are sort of adapting and even rematriate a collective, that idea. How do you find the language around that, sort of being able to describe Indigenous concepts through through English language or through French language to be able to distill? Are you finding here that there's a particular narrative? It's okay if there's not. Sometimes I find
those words heavily loaded.
Yeah.
They're hard to assess and really wrap my head around it and understand what discourse I should have around them. But I mean, they are obviously important to have because it's a common understanding for different cultures or nations to understand a common dialogue. But they are loaded, I would say.
And do you think that we need them, I guess? Is that too heavy? Okay, moving along.
Maybe someone in the audience
Yeah.
has an opinion.
There's a lot of smart people out there. I see a couple already. But anyways.
Well, I think there's some key words that I feel that everyone is just using all the time now. I think there's something that we need to be careful with about that. But otherwise, yeah, often I feel a lot of pressure to use certain words when I need to write some text.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, is it really the real language that I want to use? And about like, everything is also related to like academia and things, and sometimes I feel that it's important to using a language that it can be accessible for everyone and accessible for communities and people like grassroots and everything, and I feel that a lot of them is maybe hard to use for that reason.
Totally.
I'd say also words like resurgence, revival, it kind of goes in the same line of the kind of constructed fiction that we were disappearing, we were dying. We were always there, always present, and now we're just taking more public space, but we were always very strong in there. And
yeah, I agree with you in the sort of like we're always in relation to the context of our colonial, of like that strategy to get rid of us. And so I often wonder about that narrative and how we are starting to talk about these works, especially trying to legitimize our practices within Western academics or within these within these spaces. And I think about even just the title of the biennial that we proposed is My Sister. And so trying to think through this concept of like our relationship and my kin and how that can, it doesn't have to be about like a gender, or like sort of our roles are set by, or this relationship is set by the responsibility to one another and then the choice to care for one another and to continue that growth. And so, you know, it was really interesting trying to write the text for this and sort of trying to distill or distinguish the language that we can use that is appropriate, that feels like it is community-based, but that can exist without that context of being colonized in a way.
yeah, and the piece that is in the Biennale, I titled it Renaissance, because Renaissance was all about breaking away from existing rules and taking kind of more traditional or old rules and reinventing them to make new rules. So I felt kind of this was happening generally within the Indigenous community.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think language is always changing, right? You know, and I think we are challenging language. I think, you know, a lot of Indigenous thinkers, curators, artists are consistently challenging language, and there's always going to be words that are going to be changing in it, and how we identify and how we identify with space. And I lost my thought and where I was going with that. But, no, well, okay, I remember now. So then this idea of challenging space, I've been thinking as well, too, about, like, how we're challenging the way of working within space as well. You know, like, Niki and I get to co-curate this exhibition. When Heather Iglorite announced that the Inuit Center, the inaugural exhibition is going to be curated by 4, you know, including, like, emerging curators that had a chance to do direct mentorship with her is really incredible. So I think we're also, within challenging language within these institutes, we're also challenging the way we work and our methods of working, and starting to honor that more in these spaces as well.
And that's at the Winnipeg Art Gallery. They're coming up with, just to clarify a little bit more, they're having an Inuit Art Center that's going to be built in 2020. And so with that, there is Heather Iglorite is on the organizing committee and has announced that these 4 curators will be doing the first exhibition, all women, ranging in sort of where they are in their careers. So it's pretty remarkable that, I guess I'll speak to a little bit to Winnipeg in that regard and about the gallery. And Winnipeg Art Gallery is like this monolithic, it looks like a giant concrete glacier in the middle of the city, and has sort of done some work around inclusion, but I think with the addition of Jamie Isaac, who's part of the Ephemerals, as well, and Julie Nagum is sort of really pushing down the way institutions are organizing, are working with Indigenous communities, and sort of they are a duo that you really can't stop, and are working towards just some like crazy, insane, beautiful exhibitions there, and then this Inuit Art Center, which is the largest Inuit collection, I think, in the world, to be housed, is building a brand new space, and they've done it so far, as from an outsider, I can tell, in many good ways, and connecting with the community, bringing people in, consultation over many years. And so it's nice to finally see an institution taking those steps in a meaningful way. I always say these things with like a little bit of skepticism, because I'm just like, I'm not sure yet. but yeah. Do either of you have any questions? Does anyone out there have any questions? Anyone? No takers?
I think what we're saying basically is that we're taking over, our Indigenous representation is coming from within. We're taking ownership of our stories now, and the way we want to tell them, how we want to tell them. And to go back to gatherings, I think gatherings are important also in how we tell stories, because often there are certain protocols to go to, whether it's discussions with elders or community members, and these discussions often happen during gatherings.
Multiple gatherings.
Yeah.
Well, multiple gatherings, and I think it's also important to be talking about the incredible work happening across our country and across Turtle Island, and how there's so many incredible, not only Indigenous women, but also Indigenous men who are really pushing some boundaries and challenging so many different spaces, that it's really making room for more room for future generations, which is extremely important. And if we don't, we can't do it alone. I think it's really important that we continue talking and supporting one another, even though we're spanning across Turtle Island, to really continue pushing forward.
I agree.
No questions? We're a little early.
How are we doing for time?
We're good?
We have,
Okay.
Well, come see Becca. It's coming soon. So, yeah. It's how many artists part of it? 40?
40.
All women.
All women.
All women. And actually another artist in the crowd, Skawanati, have to say hello. And also another, just like, I guess, like maybe to give her some props right now, it's just sort of, she's taken space as well, but like within advancing on the web, within technology. And I think it's really like, I really cherish the work that she's done and the work that she continues to do for us in those capacities. Because I think right now, if you think about technology and sort of media art, which I work within, she's really paved the way. And so we're really like pleased that she's part of this exhibition, and also the fact that Indigenous Futures, is that right? If exists and goes out to communities and sort of talks about futurism, which I think is a really wonderful topic that's really gaining momentum right now, about futurisms and thinking about it in like a positive way, and people can have the opportunity to dream. And so they're working a lot with communities doing that around game building, world building, which is really extremely valuable. And so she has 2 pieces in the show. And yeah, they'll be at La Guilde and Art Mirror. And just to recap, La Guilde will be opening. There'll be a community tattoo action with Hovak Johnson on May 3rd, around 6:30. Thursday, that's a Thursday.
That's a Thursday.
That's a Thursday. Friday, we'll be at Art Mirror, 3 floors of some pretty kick-ass artwork. Carolyn has expanded the Creatura data film that she has done into an installation piece, which is we're super stoked about, and that will be, Odaya is opening that up. And then on the Saturday, we'll have buses if people are interested in coming out to Sherbrooke. We have an amazing piece from Lita Fontaine. It's called Woman's Drum. That's like so dear to my heart. It's from the early 2000s, and she's sort of reclaiming the female space around the drum. And so it's pretty, at that time, remarkable and controversial piece because it's reflecting on our community now and sort of how Indigenous women's role have shifted from where we should be and sort of the gender balance and the responsibility balance. And then finally on Sunday, Stuart Hall, there'll be another bus, I think, out there. Right, Mike? Yeah. And then Casey Adams and Jamie Black will be doing a performance at 2:30. So there'll be lots of really amazing art to see, a lot of amazing artists that will be present. And so we thank you for coming. You want to finish it off?
No, yeah, please come out and see it. And we also have our program extending out throughout the months. We have a film screening on May 9th, performed by Janine Freyna-Schutley and Thelma Garris on the May 19th. And then we'll have another panel on Indigenous female-led collectives, where we'll have a bunch of members of female collectives coming in and speaking. So everything's available on the website, right, Mike? Art Mirror, Becca website? Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much for coming out, everybody. We'll stick around for a little bit if you have any questions.